Good afternoon, Legacy viewers. Well, it's good afternoon for me from since the East in the Eastern Cape, and it's good morning to my guest in Houston, Texas, Stephen Clark. Stephen was, like myself, a 6-1 veteran, although he's a bit younger than me, and he was around in 1987, 88. Welcome, Stephen. If you want to tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about your story.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Legacy. Thank you, Andrew, and everybody for letting all of us tell our stories. And I hope this one will be interesting. And originally, I'm from Rhodesia. I was born in Salisbury, Rhodesia. And after Zimbabwean independence, we moved to South Africa, moved to a town on the Highveld called Bethel, and then went to school there, finished up there for the next few years. And then I was a little bit, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I had originally, in Standard 8 in South Africa, they let you register for all that. So I got that done, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like any young teenage boy, I wanted to fly Mirages, right? And so from there, I talked to a friend of ours whose son was a pilot, and realized that that dream was not going to happen. I was not academically ready for that. So I hemmed and hawed for a little bit, and then I spoke to my parents and said, okay, I'm going to volunteer, because I didn't have to, coming from Rhodesia, so I'm going to volunteer to join the army. So my mom took me down to Pretoria, because we were in Ellis Russ at the time. We had moved after I finished there, and spoke to a colonel or something, and it was a very easy process where he literally said, well, what do you want to serve? And I liked the idea of artillery. I knew that the South African Army was introducing the G5. So I thought, okay, that'll work. And literally, it took maybe 2 days. I got a ticket. And then I actually got on the train in Johannesburg. And my brother dropped me off. Got on the train. It wasn't a troop train. It was just a regular train, because I came a little bit later, because this was, kind of maybe the second week of January, third week of January. And so the main groups had already gone in. But because I was a little bit late, I just got on the train, and off I go to Potchefstroom. I get to Potchefstroom. I get off, you're a little bit bewildered, not really knowing what to do, but there was a army presence there, and there was some MPs, and they said, okay, where are you going? And I said, okay, I'm going to 10 Artillery Brigade. And they said, okay, go wait over there. So I was waiting there, and there was a couple of other guys that were also going there. And we waited a while. So this was like maybe now mid-morning, almost lunchtime. This Land Rover pulled up, and this massive man climbed out of this Land Rover. I didn't know much really about the army or military rank or whatever, but he had this huge red badges on his arm, okay? And he was a giant of a man. His name was RSM Botha. And he looked at us, and then he just said, Clement. And that was the start. Like, mommy, what did I do? What did I get myself into? And so it wasn't a long drive, maybe 15 minutes or so from the station to 10 Artillery. And as you come in through those gates, you have everybody there and everybody standing guard. And I was like, geez Louise, this is gonna get real here any minute. He dropped us off at, I didn't know at the time, but at where the HQ was, because there was 4 field artillery, 14 field artillery, and then the main 10 artillery brigade HQ, and they were all relatively close to each other. And it was kind of a terraced look to it, where it sloped down gently from the headquarters down to the parade ground. And milling about, you know, the army, hurry up and wait. And then eventually they got us. You got your force number, your papers, and the next minute they said, okay, you're going to go to 144 battery. I went, okay. So we get herded off to this area, and we were actually herded off quickly to where the stores were. So we got a lot of our kit. So you have your trommel, your bedding, some stuff that they put in there. And fortunately, because I had come later, it was a little bit more relaxed. There was just a few of us, not like the main, you know, when they have major guys come in, you know, by the hundreds. So then one thing you learn quickly, they don't have corporals in the artillery, they bombardiers, right? So don't call them a corporal. Anyway, so we got herded off. Now we got to carry all our stuff that weighs for us tons down to the 4-4 lines. So we go down this long road, carrying all this stuff, huffing and puffing, and then they just said, okay, for now, just choose a tent. So the guys that were there, they were actually, one of them was a doctor, and one of them was a lawyer that was there, and they you know, they got called up, and they were just waiting for the process. They eventually ended up going to where they needed to go. They didn't, you know, obviously didn't need to be in artillery. So the first night, like I said, they were very gentle to us, and I thought, okay, what the heck is this? And I didn't understand at the time. And they let us set up in these tents, and it seemed, okay, this is Rista. Okay, we can handle this. In the morning, they got us up, had breakfast, and then they said, okay, we're going to go to the medical people. And that was the thing that I didn't understand. They couldn't touch us until you got that G1, K1 card. And so we go there, they do, you know, the doctors, etc. They do the examinations, then they literally stamp that big G1, K1, and that was it. The yelling started, and you are now in the army. I joined the rest of the battery, and again, what I didn't realize at the time was actually we had our battery sergeant major, Sergeant Major Donaldson, I believe his name was. He was actually very good at this. He knew how to introduce raw civvy recruits and then turn them into artillerymen, gunners at the end. And so it was pretty methodical. One of the first things we did after that was, you know, you go and get your hair cut, and everything gets shaved off, and especially the guys that came there with their long hair, it was kind of funny to watch. You literally forgot what they looked like, because, you know, all this, and then, you know, they're yelling and screaming at you. And, you know, they started randomly chasing you after a tree. You know, you see that tree over there? Run there. I want a leaf from that tree. So that started the oppies that we used to get, right? And so slowly, over about 2 or 3 days, we were eased into what was going to happen. Introduction to the battery commander was Lieutenant de Villiers. Introduced you all the JLs that would lead us, and then you were put into then at first you're not in a troop, which was later in the gunner career. You were put into troops. So here for training, they just put you into a platoon. So I was in this platoon, finally got your final tent, because we were in tents, which actually turned out to be a blessing, because the guys that were in bungalows, their inspections were a whole lot harder than ours. They gave us a little bit of a break because you were in a tent. So here it started. So as everyone knows, what we realize is the things that they wanted to do, and our Sergeant Major did a good job, was to get the civvy out of you, to break you down, and then to build you up as a gun at the end. And it's similar to any military training around the world. And so now we're talking probably a Wednesday or so. It was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I reckon. And so for those first couple of days up until the weekend, we had it relatively simple. It was more an indoctrination of the do's and don'ts, how to strek and salute, understanding the rank and what we're supposed to do, basic marching drills, which most people could do because we did cadets in school. So for the most part, most people knew how to at least manage a little bit of their time. And then you were introduced a little bit to the bombardiers and what they expected. And then after that, there was actually a weekend in between, and they didn't really harass us much until that Monday morning. And then for the next, 12 weeks, all hell broke loose. And you find out quickly what you're made of. And I thought I was okay shape, but you realize that you're not in shape. And they start first thing in the morning, at 2,4s, which all troopies learn to love. And then you come back and you get ready for inspection. And then you have breakfast first. And then you have inspection, and then you start drill. And that's something I really did not like. It's not that I was not coordinated or anything, my step was too short. And so I found myself having to concentrate a lot to keep up. But anyway, we started learning all the drills. So from probably 7:30-ish, 7:15-ish to around 10 or so in the morning, we had a mid-break, you were doing drilling. And then from there onwards, we did a lot of lectures, tell you about anything and everything that you had to learn. You took a break for lunch, but in between, if there was so much as somebody picked his nose or something, there you all went for a run. Them yelling and screaming at you, doing push-ups and all that. And we were in coveralls at the time, if you remember. You were in your overalls. You had a water bottle behind your back that had to be full at all times. You drink when they tell you to drink. And you do this up and down all the time, all day long. And I remember that second, maybe it was the Tuesday afternoon, we're having PT and my knees locked up. And I was just like, my body was shutting down for all this activity. But that's where you learn to work as a team, right? Because that was what they wanted. They wanted you to help each other and not just be that one guy that was the athlete sprinting all the time. So a couple of guys helped me. And we got back to the tents and after that, I didn't have any more problems, but it was kind of weird that my body kind of shut down there for a little bit. And then afternoon, you would do again lectures and different things, PT in the afternoon. And so this cycle, which is a cycle familiar to all in the military, carries on, and it just builds and progresses and gets more intense. You started doing more running, more marching. They teach you how to do the different things. And then we went and got our rifles, and we thought, okay, this is pretty cool, until you have to keep it clean all the time. And you know how they are, the instructors, they will find the most minute, tiniest speck of whatever and use that to give you an oppie, right? And I remember the one time the bombardier, he looked at this thing, it's disassembled, the R4, and he looks inside it and he says, "Clark, what the F is going on here? I see a sawmill in there." And I'm like, "What?" He said, "And it was a speck of dust, but it's just an opportunity to mess with you." For the most part, inspections, went pretty good, but they always found something wrong, until we saw one of these bombardiers, and he was almost a bully. And we saw him the one time, this was a few weeks in, we're kind of waiting for inspection, and he had white gloves on. And we thought, oh, hell. But the guy, he went outside and he put dirt, as he came into the tent, he put dirt on his finger. So it was going to be dirty anyway. So he goes around all the cusses that you have and the trommel and everything. And he says, "Look, I found dirt." And so there we went again. With this time, I believe it was, we had to carry these stupid trommels. I don't know if you ever did trommel PT, but it was not good, because this thing clanked. And then you had to clean it up, reorganize it, re-inspection, then go for drill. So it was not fun at the time, but you learn to try and understand what your bombardier wanted, what he didn't want. And like any good trooper, you try to outsmart them all the time. And like I learned to do, use so many push-ups before eating, right? Right in front of the Manasi, the mess hall, they had a pull-up bar. So you had to do a number of pull-ups before you even allowed to eat. So you just learned how to jippo, right? You learned how to use the system, make sure they weren't watching you, and try to get around, because if they caught you, it was even worse for you, right? So we do all this training. They teach us how to assemble and disassemble our rifles, magazines, how to do all the stuff that you can do it in your sleep. And I remember the first time, it was quite a few weeks into basics, they ran us, because as a gunner, and I'm sure in the infantry is similar, you weren't allowed to walk anywhere. You had to run everywhere. So we run down, it was probably a couple of kilometers down to the shooting range, and you get there, and they teach you. One of the cool things that they did, we had one of our sergeants, he was like a small arms weapons expert. And so he taught us a bunch of things. And one of the cool things he did is he put us all behind the, where they used to sit behind the range, right? They had the things where you used to be able to pull up the targets and all that. And he put us behind there, and he would shoot different weapons so that we could hear what they sounded like. The R1 had a particular sound. The R4 was a lot quicker. So, the round went a lot quicker. So he taught us all these things. And then we had our chances to shoot. And I remember the one lieutenant, he came up to me, and you do it in your different positions, standing, kneeling, prone, laying down. And I did never really shot a rifle like this before. And he comes up to me and he says, "Clark, that's pretty good for a Royneck. You can, or a Soti, that's what they like to call us, because being English speaking." And I said, "Thank you, Lieutenant." And it was pretty good. And then we ran back. And so this, they built on that thing. So basics, for the most part, was, just one big blur as they moved us through the different levels of training, and like I said, building up. And that's where the Sergeant Major was really good at allowing us to do things so that we weren't, because we saw like one of the batteries that was there, 142 battery, they had some, in my opinion, and I'm sure it's different for them, some of the most sadistic instructors that would just give them all kinds of hell. And they're in the bungalows too, so it was worse for them. And later they would actually be Quebec battery and also a G5 battery that would go up with us to the border. So one of the other things that was a highlight was the first time you stand guard, and you'd have to stand guard at different places. They had, obviously at the gate, they had a couple of places around Potchefstroom in 10 artillery. The test, where they used to test all the guns, where they stored the ammunition. So you had these different things, and you would be assigned to go to these different things. And that thing was, so it would be a platoon at a time. And I remember you had to be so on top of it, because one of the worst things, in any gunner out there will remember Sergeant Major Sumpy Claessens. He was the brigade sergeant major. He was a small man, and he had the green, if you remember, the green patch, and he was a riller. He was the worst thing that even high-ranking officers would be wary of this man. He was, and he would sometimes be part of this inspection. Fortunately not for me, but again, we got to meet RSM Buerta, the big guy, who was our regimental 414 artillery, and they would come and do the inspection. And the interesting thing with the R4 is when you had to charge it so they could do the inspection, you had to hold it back. And my spring was a brand new spring. So now you're holding it for many minutes, and you're feeling the pain to hold this thing back, but you had to hold it. You could not move, nothing like that. They did it. They made sure everything was okay. They assigned you. And the ridiculous thing is they gave you 5 rounds of ammunition. And there you go. You had to go and protect the base now from whoever. I remember the first time doing it, you so parat that you get assigned a time to do it, and you either lay down or you standing guard, and you really, like somebody was going to attack you. Realized later on that it wasn't that bad, and you could go and find a place to go sleep if you were lucky. One of the times, the guard duties, we had the dog unit with us. So we learned with those guys, the dog would wake you up. So you could definitely go take a nap then, because if there was somebody coming, the dog would wake the guys up, and everybody would be ready and protecting and guarding and everything like that. So as the basic training progressed, you realize how fit you can become and how mentally tough you can become. And in the 14 field, as we were, the goal was to pass this week, like a fuss bait week, a hell week, whatever you want to call it, towards like the 11th week. And what that consisted of is they took you to the field, and in that you were going to demonstrate to them everything that you learned. But you never slept. You only ate once a day. You were on route marches all the time, and they built them up. And that's what I liked about Sergeant Major, is he still was very good at building up. So we did a lot of obstacle courses. You did a lot of weapon shooting. So that was the first time we got to shoot the MAGs. And again, this Sergeant Major, what was nice about him, he says, he came with a Sawmill 50, and he says, I'm not taking any ammunition back with me. We're going to shoot everything. And he had a lot. So we got to shoot a lot, which was a lot of fun. We got to shoot traces for the first time. We got to shoot at nighttime for the first time, where they would shoot a flare into the air, and you'd get those 50-round magazine full of tracers. I mean, for a fireworks show, it was pretty darn good. And you try and shoot the flares. But this whole time, I mean, you've been broken down and built up mentally tough, and you come to realize how tough you are, not just physically but mentally, because you're not sleeping much. They'll wake you up in the middle of the night. They'll pretend to attack you because it's the first time you dig in foxholes, which comes in real handy later in our deployments up north, and being guard duty, and they surprise you and they do all this thing. And the final day of this thing, we were going to do a 20-kilometer route march, which was on gravel road, and you're marching. So you're in full kit webbing, you know, everything, your stall duck, your rifle, and you march at their pace for 20 kilometers. And when you got back, so we got back just after maybe around 1 o'clock or so, and all had blisters. So we all had to go to the medics. And if you remember how they had to do that, they stick a needle in there, they suck it out, and then they spray that methylite or whatever in there. And it was so painful, but it took the blisters away. And I mean, you have guys, I remember the one guy, he bent the needle because he jerked back so much. And you had guys, you know, bombardier, you know, that, but you know, the goal was to pass because you wanted to become a gunner. And so that we had a quick brunch, as they would say, and then they got us ready for that night. We'd do another 20-kilometer march, but this time it's pitch black, and you'd go from point to point to point all around. Potchefstroom has a huge artillery range behind the camp, of course, where all the guns used to shoot. And so it was shared with, I think, the horse unit, the dog unit, and some other people. It was predominantly for the arty guys. So then that's when they gave us, you know, as we've been practicing all this for all these weeks, you get the telephone pole. And so they gave us the telephone pole and other stuff to carry. And again, this is also to see how well you navigate, right? How much you paid attention in that map reading classes, how to do it at nighttime, and all that kind of stuff. So they gave us a radio, and each platoon set off. And so they staggered us over a few, you know, maybe every 15 minutes, they let one platoon go and another one. So it was our turn to go, and off we went. And then we quickly realized that this wasn't going to work, because we had to figure out what we had to do. So the point of that meeting, that we came up with a roster for the rest of the 20 kilometers. Each person, we had team up with another guy to carry the pole. And those poles were not easy to carry, if you remember. And then also there was a couple of us that were pretty decent with navigating. So off we went and set up the schedule. And so we started in the early evening hours where it was light, and then it transitioned into dark. And we made it to our first place where there was some lieutenants waiting. And when we got there, they gave you the coordinates to the next place. So off we went to the next place. It started getting dark, but we had a pretty good rhythm, and we would also stop for a few minutes. And if you remember, a soldier can sleep anywhere at any time on anything. So we would crash for a few minutes take a little break, drink some water, and off we would go. So at this one time now, it was pretty dark. It was completely dark. It was black. We had a flashlight with us, I believe. And you know, you're all black is beautiful up and all that kind of fun stuff. And I was navigating. So I was doing a pretty good job. At least I thought so in my mind. But there were holes, you know, the like art fart holes in the in this part of where we were walking through. So here I am marching along. I'm at the head. Next minute, I trip into this hole and I go head first into the hole. And I'm stuck. My rifle, my backpack, you know, my rucksack, everything. I'm stuck. My feet sticking up. And I'm like, help, help. I'm stuck there. So that my buddies came, they pulled me out. We all had a good laugh about that. And then we pressed on and we go to this thing. And the whole time, the lieutenants especially, they were coming over the radio. Are you guys ready to give up? They'd play music over it. One of the songs that was popular there was "You're on the Road to Nowhere." And they'd play that over the thing. And so we went along. And as we went to each spot, you know, we asked them, how's it going? And, you know, they didn't really say anything. And this went the whole night. So 20 kilometers, and we finally finished just as the sun was coming up. We come into camp where we had set up, and we realized that our platoon was the first platoon in. And over the night, we could hear over the radio, one platoon hadn't even made it to the first place yet. And so we get there, the sergeant was there, and he was like, okay, go lay down. So we did. We crashed because we were there early. We were there around 7 a.m. He said, go lay down. So we went to our foxholes there and we crashed for a couple of hours. We slept. Over that time, a few other platoons had started coming in, and they treated us on for brunch. We got there for brunch. And then the sergeant said, he called out our platoon, and we thought, oh gosh, what now? And he says, okay, grab all your stuff, get in the back of the sawmill. So we're like, okay. And because we were there first, we got to drive back the few kilometers back into the battery lines back at 14 Field. And when we got there, he says, okay, it was early afternoon. He says, free time, you can do whatever you want. So I remember that one of the things that I did is went and showered for about an hour. Just get because we hadn't had any showers the whole week. And it was just relaxing because your body was broken. And then I didn't even eat that night. I only woke up the next morning when they, you know, called for roll call. They got us. That was the first time I woke up. And then the other guys, so many of them, they had to walk back to camp. It wasn't far, maybe 5 or 6 kilometers. They had to walk back. So, you know, they came in through that. I don't remember because I was fast asleep. Next morning, so that was pretty much the end of that. Some of the things that, you know, with that was maybe the 10th or 11th week of that 12-week basics. Then after that, there was some other things that we had to do, drilling, and they assessed us on that. How good you were with the rifle. And then there was the whole regiment was together at that time, and it was like this big competition. And I remember our lieutenant, he was really, and the sergeant major, they were really they wanted to win. They wanted 144 battery to win, and there was, I think, 5 batteries. Yeah, there was 141, 142, 143, 144, and then 2 medium battery that was there. And so we did that, and we finished all that, and then they scheduled a passing out parade, but 14 field was unique there because on the day of the passing out parade, we had to do a 25-kilometer route march. So first thing in the morning, we're up and we all started together. I don't know how many thousands there were of us in 14 field, and we all went to a designated spot about 12 and a half kilometers away and then came back. And that was called the Blisters Trophy. And that's what the rank, what they wanted to win, because, you know, that was like the prestige. And we didn't know that our Sergeant Major, he had actually won it a few times. And we get back, we showered, we're wearing our browns pretty much for the first time and all that. We had our passing out parade for basics. And during that thing, we found out that our battery 144 had won the Blisters Trophy. So our lieutenant was the commander of the battery. He was very chuffed with that and he was happy. And so after that, maybe it was maybe a week or two after that, we were allowed to go on our first R&R pass, went home for the first time, came back, and then we started with second phase. And if you remember, in the Army, you never volunteer for anything. Because like the one thing they got us, they said, well, who wants to be a driver? So a few of us, you know, we stick up our hands and stuff like that. And they said, okay. And they give you brooms and you have to go and sweep somewhere, right? And so when all this started, the second phase of the training for the next few weeks, where basically you would learn the small caliber weapons. So you learn the MAG, they'd have the
Steven,
50
I'm just
caliber
gonna,
machine gun. Yes.
can I just interrupt you there quickly? I think I just want to finish off the basics. So obviously basics was pretty much the same in any national serviceman unit, be it infantry or Air Force or Navy or artillery.
Correct.
Just obviously coming from Rhodesia, how was your Afrikaans?
So that was the thing that it was pretty bad. And that was one of the good things to come out of my military career, because obviously a lot of the lectures in Afrikaans, all the drill was in Afrikaans. Obviously a lot of your bombardiers and lieutenants, they're Afrikaans and they couldn't stand us, anything. So you had to learn pretty quick. So by immersion, by the end of basics, I could speak Afrikaans, which is a beautiful thing for later because I married an Afrikaans girl. So it all worked out for me.
Oh, that's great. And then just getting to the mainly the non-commissioned officers. Okay, so what was a ordinary troop? What was he called? I mean, in infantry we were riflemen. What?
Okay, so first in the basics we were just called a recruit, right? A recruit. Once we finished that first 12 weeks, we were then officially called gunners, and you actually got a gunner's bulky, and 14 field and 4 field had 2 different emblems. So ours was the little cannon with the scroll ubiquitous, which means everywhere. And we got to put that on our berets. And then we were thought we were, you know.
And then you had a lance bombardier and a bombardier. And then what did you then go to sergeant? Did you then go to sergeant, or was there something else in terms of the?
No. Then it was sergeant, staff sergeant, sergeant major, you know,
yeah, so
and then the rank.
the
so it was really only bombardier.
Bombardier that was different. Okay, yeah, no, that's great. Sorry, I just wanted to, you know, just for the viewers out there to sort that out.
No.
Yeah, you know, the other thing that you mentioned, being able to sleep anywhere and everywhere. You know, I often felt sorry when we were hitchhiking home, and poor guy would stop because he was looking for company. And no sooner had he driven off 30 meters down
Yeah,
the road, we were already asleep. But yeah, okay. So then you
exactly.
start.
And then, and you know that. So we
Okay.
started our second phase. Like I said, again, you're going to learn to do these different things. The discipline level and all of that, nothing changed there. Again, they believed because you were a gunner, you never walked anywhere. And so everything you did, you were running. But again, by this time, one of the things that we did early in that second phase is our lieutenant volunteered to do a marathon. And we never knew that we could do it. And it was a cross-country marathon, actually. And so we got to do that. And it was super easy. Even with those horrible Army tackies tennis shoes that they gave us, you know, we were able to do this marathon, no problem. That was, you know, we didn't realize that you became so fit, everything you did. And because you were running the whole time. So we started with second phase. Like I said, you do that, MAGs, the 50 caliber, RPGs, that was a lot of fun. Grenades, and then also driving. So again, I still wanted to drive. So for part of that, they separated us, and you had to go through what you did in Civvy Street, the same driver's course, you know, the same rules of the road and everything. You got tested completely. And I remember for us, I don't know how it was for anybody else, but you had to get 100%. You could not get 98 or 80 or whatever. You had to get everything right. So we had the written test first, and then they started to teach us. Our first vehicle, like most in South Africa, was the Buffel. And so we learned to drive the Buffel. Back behind, again, because 10 artillery, you know, it was nice because we had this huge range behind us. So we could go driving there. We drove in the city as well, in the city of Potchefstroom. And we got to learn to drive the Buffel. So again, forget now, really, people can comment below because I don't know how long the period of time was. But at that time as well, in the history of South Africa, we had the unrests in the townships. So most of the batteries, and I'm sure other units, you know, infantry, etc., had to go do what we called riots. We go to assign us to different townships. And so that part of the training actually shifted to that riot control, how to deal with crowds training. You know, we used to stone each other. I remember that. We'd stand up, some of us on one side, and the others would get stones and, you know, simulate being stoned over a distance and rocks being thrown at you. And you had, I remember those special helmets that covered the back of your neck and shields and all that kind of stuff. And so that second phase was kind of part of that. When we finished that, also you started to learn a lot of the infantry drills that, you know, we all had to learn as well, I reckon. The Alpha Bravo, you know, moving and stuff like that. And I remember the one time we did that behind this copy that was behind the main lines. And so we doing this Alpha Bravo thing, and you know, you had to hit the deck. I mean, when he called, the instructors called deck, and you had, no matter what, you had to hit. And they obviously on purpose picked where it was very rocky. There was cactuses and stuff like that. So you just go down into this stuff because the fear of the bombardier sergeant, the sergeant major, was a lot worse than what you had on the ground. Rocks and stuff. So you get all beat up and stuck with thorns and all that. But again, it to that thing where you overcome that fear, because if somebody was actually going to shoot at you, which we experienced later on in life, that you hit the deck, you don't worry about your surroundings. You made sure you hit the ground. So that became second nature. The other things that become second nature, I bet you everyone that you could still wake them up now in the middle of the night and ask for their force number, and they can rattle it off to you just like that. You know, those are the things: your rifle number, your force number, all those things that you had to do. That muscle memory, you didn't know what that was called, but that muscle memory, now you know what it is, that you it becomes instinctive in you. So then our battery 144, we were assigned to go to Mamelodi and Eersterus, which is on the east side, I believe, of Pretoria. And so we went there for the next number of weeks. It was quite a good time, a long time that we went there. So they drove us up from Potchefstroom. We got to the camp. The camp that they'd set up for us, for the army, was on top, looking down into Mamelodi. And we started getting instruction again. And, you know, the history of South Africa back then, they were, you know, a lot of the turmoil was in the townships. And so they trained us that way to be, basically we were going to be the SAP's support. Whatever the SAP did, we would be the muscle, right? We would be their backup. And so they had like liaison with us at the camp. There was SAP with us, and they would talk to our rank structure in the mornings or evenings, and we would patrol, go in support, and do the different things, man roadblocks and certain areas to, again, in support of the SAP. We could detain, obviously not arrest. That was what the SAP would do. And so actually, I kind of liked the riots. It was your first taste of soldiering proper, because you weren't getting, we had very little PT at that time, you know, for the first time. And you were actually doing what you were trained to do wherever. So, you know, walking in the townships, driving in the townships. One of the things that we came to realize is the township, crime-wise, would pick up, especially on Friday nights, because of, you know, people would get paid, then they get drunk, then other people would come and steal from them. So they would push us out a lot in the evenings, Friday evenings, just to be a show of force. And a lot of times, you know, you would come to situations where, you know, I remember this one time, guys had beat up this guy, and he'd been hit with a brick and his head was split open. So you learn to exercise the first aid that they had taught you, and you kind of wait and you call in, and they send an ambulance, and the SAP would come again. And this, you know, it's just a lot of this. We'd go to the shebeens in the evenings as well, just as a show of force with the SAP again. It was like the shebeens were tolerated, I guess. But what we used to call them, because it was popular back in the 80s, these special kind of undercover policemen, we call them Mamelodi Vice, from Miami Vice, but we call them Mamelodi Vice. And they would go in there and they would tell us, the uniform police, you know, the different things, and we'd go to these areas and back them up. And I remember the one time that we went, so we had a few of the platoons deployed, and the police would go in, they would be the breaching force, and I forget what the situation was, whether it was ANC suspects or what it was. They didn't tell us too much, but they said we would cordon off this block, and it was a nighttime. It was probably around 11 o'clock or so at night, and we cordoned off the area. They dropped us off. It was the first time I kind of really got rattled, because it's pitch black, you hear stuff moving, and you don't know what it is. Can you shoot, can you not shoot? And maybe it was just a cat or a dog running through an alleyway or something, but you're so on edge and ready for something. It was supposedly a successful raid. The police did whatever they had to do, and we went back to base. So we did a lot of those kind of things there. I remember the one time as well, it was a Saturday, and there was a funeral, and the person that had died was a member of the activist community. So a large portion of the community came out for that, but it turned out to be very peaceful, because again, with the army presence, they knew not to mess with things, because our rules were a little bit different from the police. The police would normally try to diffuse the situation and figure, but the army, we were just more of a steamroller if needed, and take care of business. Thank God that never happened. And so we, I remember one of those funerals, it went off really well. We just sat in the buffels and watched them. They yelled and jeered at us, and we just waved to them sweetly and said whatever. And the funeral passed by and everything went very well. I remember one of the times as well is, again, if they got some sort of information, if you remember at that time, they used to burn a lot of the schools. So we would also be deployed to the different schools. And I remember the one time, and for the life of me, I don't know why this happened, was I was alone. I was dropped off at this elementary school in Mamelodi by myself. And they said, okay, it was early in the morning. They pick me up later in the afternoon. I didn't have a radio. They had a telephone at the school, I remember. And that was it. We had to guard the school. So then they brought another guy. So there were two of us. And so here we are, standing guard, and the kids were very good about it and all that. We just walked around the school, made sure everything was safe. But, a lot of times people, point fingers at the military and stuff like that. But that was one of the good things, really proud of, that we were doing, that we were protecting the local populace from bad elements. There was no political motive or anything, just don't mess with the kids, so we did that a lot, school protections. And then, so we did roadblocks. I remember that was the one was interesting again, because all the excitement always happened on the weekends. So we manning a roadblock, and you'd have a stopper group in front. So if somebody came through, you could block them and stuff like that from getting away. And these two guys came in. They were looking, a couple of white guys, they came into the township, and they were just looking for some of that fun weed stuff and some ladies of the night. And they didn't want to listen to us, but they wanted to go in, and we said, hey, heck no, there was a curfew, nobody was going in. And they were really belligerent, and they were on motorbikes, and they really wanted to go in. And I remember one of the guys, he said no, he cocked his R4, pointed it at the guy and said, you're not going in. So they finally got the message, turned around and walked away. So we did a lot of those kind of things where we just basically protecting the community, and then also in Easterus, which was the colored people that were right up to as well next to Mamelodi. But all in all, it was actually really good. We had a good time. It was I think one of the real beneficial things that I was a part of for that first few months in the military, where you actually exercise what you're doing. So then they shipped us back to Potchefstroom. We get to Potchefstroom now. What will happen is you'll actually start learning to be a gunner, and you'll get that. So if you're familiar, we have G5s, we have G2s, which is the 140 millimeter, the old 5.5 inch. We had the rocket artillery, the MRLs, and the mortar guys. Now the mortar guys, they'd actually, in basics, they had left because they were going to be parachute trained. So they went to Bloom and they trained with the parabats, and they did that training. And so when we came from riots, 141 battery had then joined us. They came back to 14th Field because they were going to learn to shoot the 120 millimeter. So, and quite a number of them actually made it, and they were, you know, parachute qualified to jump with the parabats whenever that situation was needed. Fortunately for us, I guess it was never really needed. But so then what they realized, the G5 batteries, so 142 battery and 2 medium battery, because the G5s were bigger, they needed more people that they had. So they grabbed from some of the units, and so they came, I guess, the rank and file, and they just said, okay, we need so many from 144 and 143 to go and join, you know, 142 battery and 2 medium battery. And so I got assigned to 2 medium battery, which is the G5 battery, which would later in 6-1 be called Sierra battery. So I wasn't really keen on that because you're starting to, you know, form the bonds with the guys that you're with now for the first 6 or so months. And you're going to be ripped away from this, and you're going to go to a whole new battery, which, you know, maybe they don't like you, they look at you differently. You got their bombardiers and all that, didn't like that. So it was like, yeah, this was not a good thing, but, you know, you got to do what you got to do. So I forget the actual number of us, but there were a few of us. We went to 144, reported there. They put us in different tents. I landed up in this tent. Some of these guys that they were later to be in their own troop a battery. They were going to be a G5 battery. So I thought, okay, cool. And so they started the G5 training. So a lot of instruction happened with that. So at first, there's a lot of just, again, indoctrination, the paperwork basically of it and all that. And then as a good gunner, you get introduced to the G5 Smoky, which is the 155 shell. And that's what they like to give oppies with now. So the G5 shell, I think, weighs about 110 pounds. But it's a very, for the gunners out there, they know, and it has fins on the back, which is used in the rifling, in the barrel when it gets shot out. You know, it's just like a bullet. It's got rifling to stabilize it. But those fins, no matter what, it would cut into you, no matter way. There was no way, because it was fat on one end and it tapered down. And so we all got used to doing PT now with this thing, and we hated it. I don't think there was anybody that loved PT with this smoky. So it was an inert round, a dummy round, but same weight, shape of this flipping thing that we had to lug around with us all the time. If you did anything wrong, you were going to get an oppie with this stupid thing. Just standing there holding it in between your legs. So you hold it at the back and hold it in the front in between your legs. So you hunched over holding this damn thing, and it gets heavy quickly. And some of the guys in the battery were little guys. You know, you could see they were not having fun. But then we had, like, one of the guys that came with me, a guy called Nordia. He was a monster of a man. He was probably about 6'5" himself, and he could handle these shells no problem. He was just naturally strong. He was there was a few of those guys who actually, that we learned that they were just massively strong over the time. We could learn the G5 has it's a nitrogen bottle, just like an oxyacetylene bottle, those tall bottles. And the one guy was able to carry this damn bottle, where it'd take two of us, he could carry one of them by himself. So what you realize is that, they're just making you strong, because you're going to have to learn how to handle that freaking G5 round all the time and all that. But as we started that, because of my driving, they yanked me out of this thing, and they said, okay, you don't get volunteered, you get voluntold. They said, okay, we need a bunch of you to, I forget the number, you're going to learn how to drive a Ratel. Like, okay. And we'd seen them on base a couple of times. It was just interesting to see, but we're not infantry. That's an infantry vehicle. But they said, no worries, you're going to learn how to do this thing. So the one morning they said, okay, you got to be at one of the mess halls up front for instruction at 7 a.m. So we go over there, we march ourselves there, we get there, and we find out again, the RSM, the guy that picked me up in the Land Rover at the beginning, he was our instructor. And turned out that this guy was actually a really good guy. He had, in his heart of hearts, he loved his troopies, and he really took care of us. And so there was not a big group, and so it was the whole 14 field. And so I guess there was guys from 142 battery and 2 medium that came together, and we started to learn how to drive the Ratel. Again, some instruction phase, but then quickly they got a few of them and we started learning how to drive. And the cool thing, again, because 10 artillery had that whole range behind us, we had a really good off-road experience where we could drive these things. And for the Ratel drivers out there, I know it's quite an amazing machine to drive, and it's got so many things they have to do. You're sitting in the middle, you're not sitting to the left or to the right. The Buffalo was on the wrong side of the road. But this thing, now you're sitting in the middle, it's heavier, but it has a lot of power. The engine's all the way to the back, has these different systems to engage diff locks and 6x6, and you could do it individually. And so it was a lot of fun. The one thing that, again, you get into trouble with, because troopies are always getting into trouble. So I'm driving in Potchefstroom now. So you're driving, the instructor's up top. There was a Staff Sergeant Hares, I believe his name was. He's sitting in the turret. He's telling us, go left, go right, and all this. If you remember, in the Ratel in the back, you had the engine kill. And you pull that engine kill, it kills the engine. Because it's an automatic, you cannot stall it, but you can pull that. So I'm coming up to a stoplight, and the guys behind me, they pull this damn thing, and the engine dies, and I freak out. The staff sergeant quits yelling at me. He's like, how can you be so stupid to stall an automatic? How the hell did you do that? And I'm, oh, I don't know. Eventually got it all started up, and then I look behind because they're all laughing at me. I'm like, you sons of, they killed it back there. So driving around, and then the one time as you get your confidence level up, I believe the instruction was pretty good. So they had this obstacles back there where we would drive the Ratels. There's mud, there's hills, and all this thing. And a lot of times, there was like 6 of us in the back and one driving, and we would rotate as we were training. And my friend Sean Ellis, he was driving the one time, and so he goes over this hill that had to be about 4 or 5 meters total height, and he goes over it real nice and slow. And so this staff sergeant, in the turret, you can in front, the driver's right in front of you. So he gets down and he kicks Sean with his boots square in the back of his head, and he says, "Dis nie jou ma se kar. Ry die effing ding. You're not your mother's car. It's an infantry fighting vehicle." So Sean drives around, and that was the first time I saw he actually ramped and got most of the wheels of this Ratel airborne and landed. And then the sergeant was smiling. We were all smiling. It's like, okay, that's how you drive this damn thing. One of the cool things with that was I missed morning inspection. Every time my bombardier for that tent that we were in, he would ask the guys, where the hell is this flippin' driver? Oh, he went to go do this driving course. So I missed it. And I'd only see him later in the afternoon or whatever, and he would like yell and scream at me. I'm like, well, and that was the cool thing. We were under the cover of the sergeant major, the regimental sergeant major. So they couldn't do too much to us. It was kind of a nice thing. The guys will remember that we had this like beautiful protection over us, which was the regimental sergeant major. And one of the good things was during all this, after a few weeks again, he let us go on pass just as this Ratel driver group. So apart from the battery, we went on a weekend pass. So that was real nice. We went away because when the battery went on pass, there was only the 10 or so of us. So it was like having a weekend off anyway. So it was really cool there. So again, we're doing all this. The technical guys, we have TAs. They were learning the stuff. They do all the setting up of the guns with gyroscopes, etc. You had the guys that were learning to do the fire control. They would be in the fire control truck. Later, we would call it the tabula. And that was the name of it, I think I remember correctly. And so we learning and training on all this. The guys got more proficient at that. So we dry firing for the most part now. We're not shooting live ammo. And so they would take us out to the range and do a lot of, moving in and out of positions, setting up, etc. And then it came the day, I don't know how long it was, but where the guys were actually going to shoot the G5 for the first time. And that was a hell of an experience. They do all the drills, had to get it absolutely right. And one of the things with the G5 to open the block, it was an actual method that you do, because that breech block, you couldn't open it normally. You couldn't just open. You actually had to use your whole weight and, bring yourself open. So you had to learn all those things, and they got that. And each gunner has a number. Number one is the guy in charge, and they would become honor bombardier, lance bombardiers later after the training. You had a number two. I believe he was the one that put in. He would actually be the guy who'd pull the cord at the end. Number three was one of the important guys. He was on the sights, so you had to learn the sights, and you sit next to this thing. So they, the G5, it normally travels like this, but then you can bring it out like that. It has its own independent diesel motor, and so you can, once it comes off the gun tractor, you can maneuver it. So they had to learn all these things, and then they got to fire it. And with the baptism of fire, you have a fire bucket, which is those metal buckets with water, and you dip this like giant Q-tip in there, and you'd clean out the chamber each time you shot it. And so that was your baptism of fire. You had to dunk your head in this greasy, soapy, nasty mess, and that was, you were indoctrinated now as a gunner. So each thing you learn, step on step building, coming into position, getting out of position. Like I say, it teaches these guys using the gyroscope. You've got to know where you are before you can shoot somewhere. So they would set up, get their position. The guns have these poles that the gunner would set up from that gyro, all 8 guns, and then you set up, and then you get your fire mission and shoot accordingly. And so the first times you're using a very, I believe we have 6 charges that you put in behind the round. And we were using charge 1 because, like I said, the artillery range was pretty big, but not that big. And so you'd shoot a few kilometers actually. And so the first time you shoot, you could actually see where your rounds were coming out, a few kilometers in front of us. So that was a huge thrill. Finally start shooting the guns. But again, it's constantly, if you make one mistake, your rest of your day was getting an oppie. And then we also learned how to do the steel parades, right? You remember that? Where your kit be perfect, had to be clean. So that's where they teach you how to watch over everything. You've got all the different toolkits to maintain the guns, and or, for us, we had the Ratels. So you had to know all that stuff for the Ratels. The Ratel drivers out there will remember that. So you started doing those inspections, and then slowly but surely they built us up and started doing exercises, daytime and nighttime, getting into position, shooting and all that. And for these maneuvers that we started doing now, a lot of, here I thought I was going to be a Ratel driver, and well, there weren't any Ratels there. So I got a Land Rover, and that was fun. I got this old diesel 4-cylinder Land Rover that I got to drive. And then later on, as we went further into the thing, it actually turned out to be pretty interesting for me. As a driver for certain things, so you would drive the observation officers, the guys that would be deployed well in front of the guns. They would do the observing for the fire to call into fire. So you get to drive them around and drop them off in places. So I would drive up to a hill with this officer, they'd call in the shots, and then you go back down. I learned to realize the Land Rover is not too terrible of a vehicle, but it had no power to climb these hills. It would take forever to get up there. Nothing like the modern vehicles now. And so then it came to a point we said, okay, guys, now you're ready to do thing, and so we were going to be deployed to Lohatla. So okay, so again, the Ratel drivers, for whatever reason, we were singled out, and they said, you're going to go to Bloemfontein, and you're going to go pick up the command Ratel. If you remember that, that's the one with the 50 caliber, and it had the charts in the back that placed all the extra radios, and it had air conditioning, which was really nice. So we were going to go, so we drove down to Bloemfontein, and the rest of the guys were going to come from Potchefstroom with the gun tractors and the guns and the support vehicles, and they were going to meet us in Lohatla. So we went to Bloem. Never really knew where we went, but there was this underground storage facility. That's all I can remember. We got them 2 drivers per Ratel, and we drove then down to Lohatla. And I believe we got there ahead of them, like by a couple of days. And so we were waiting in an area in Lohatla. If you remember, there's a bunch of like pre-designated areas, like these concreted areas. And so we were there. We went to the mess hall there, and we ate there, and there was the one side guys were already there, and there were a few other guys there. It was kind of cool because we got there before time. We kind of were watching what they were doing. And one of the things I remember, the infantry guys, that we got to watch before the rest of our battery got there, was the clearing the trenches. And that was really interesting to me. So they had set up like a enemy camp there with the trenches, and they would assault this thing. So we hadn't seen that kind of stuff yet. We hadn't. So it was kind of interesting to watch them do that. Then the rest of the gunners caught up to us, so we meet up with them, and we had these, like I said, these nice command Ratels for about 2 days. What we knew but didn't know is Operation Modular had started up in Angola, and so they needed these command Ratels, and so didn't have them for very long. Boom, they were gone. So they gave us some other. I guess they went to the infantry, and I got a Ratel 60, the one with the 60 millimeter mortar thing on the front. And okay, so we started, and again, it was a lot of droebestokings, as they said. You know, it's just dry fire missions to kind of get you acclimatized and all that. And I remember the one, I think it was a Saturday, they had a demo, which was really good. I don't know who else attended that, but they had the G5s, the MRLs, they had the infantry, they had the Olifant tanks. So everybody was lined up there. They had the Noddy cars, you know, the Elans, and they did a whole show for everybody. And again, I'm biased, but the most impressive thing was the G5s. There's just nothing like a G5 when it goes off. It's thunderous, the dust, the smoke, the sound, it's amazing. You know, like the Olifant tank, they shoot and it's over so quickly. That round travels so quickly, you know, you see that, and it's hitting its target. But with the G5s, it's, yeah, you'll see it, the Ratel 20s, you'd see the rounds hit. But when that 155 round hits, you know, everything is destroyed in front of it. It was really impressive. So you got to see that. Over the next couple of weeks, we started working the infantry guys, those maneuvers that, you know, would in a few more weeks would happen for real. So, you know, prep shooting, they would come in, they would do their thing, they would dismount, they'd do all the scenarios, do that over and over and over again. And then the cool thing with Lohatla is that the guns could now shoot much further. So you're starting to shoot, 12 to 18 kilometers, so you don't even see where your rounds are coming in anymore. Again, the cool thing with me is I was driving different vehicles. So I was driving the Ratel at one time. So I'd go with the forward observers and you'd see the rounds coming in. So I got to see that. And then something happened. And then I ended up driving the fire control, which was the SAML 20. And it had the box on top of it. And I got to be with the guns again for a lot of that. And then all of a sudden I was out and I was driving. I think they were just making sure we got enough experience as drivers, I hope, to experience the different things. So I was, for the finale type thing, back on the Ratel. And it was really impressive, that the war games thing, they set everything up. You have the instructors from Lohatla give you this whole big rundown of attacking this enemy camp or whatever it was. And so then we got all the, bombed up ammunition and everything, and we deployed and we started this, I think it was called Sweepslag, Oefening Sweepslag. That was the end thing. And so we got to do that over the next few days, the different things, move around the whole of Lohatla, which turned out to be a really huge thing. Other things which I learned to help me later on when we were deployed in Angola is make sure your vehicle is always full of diesel. Whenever you can, whatever vehicle you're driving, make sure it's full of diesel. Because you never ever want to not be without, because that was the worst thing to happen to you, to run out. So I was always, driving to the motor pool or whatever to do that, to make sure. So actually, just before that, one of the funny troopy stories, again, the troopies always trying to outsmart everybody. So it was a weekend, it was a Saturday. We were in the field, but not too far from the main Lohatla complex. And a friend of mine, George, and I were like, man, it'd be nice to call home. Well, we just like, well, that's not going to happen, because how are we going to? So I said, well, okay. Why I'm saying that is I can say I need to go put in diesel in the Ratel, and we can drive into the main Lohatla complex and go fill up with diesel, and we can call home. We were not allowed to do it. But somehow we convinced the lieutenant or the bombardier that we were going to go put in diesel, and George was up in the turret, and we drove in, we made our phone calls, and we came back. And the next morning, we kind of grouped together. The chaplain was going to come to us, and Staff Franklin, and this guy was also not a man to be messed with. He was from the Cape, and he used to bray when he talked in Afrikaans. And he started yelling us, and he says, like, Vida, you know what, stole the Ratel, because somebody had said there was a Ratel out by itself there that Saturday afternoon. So George and I were just like, we don't know nothing for nothing. And he looked at us, he knew, but he could not. So Staff Franklin, if you're still around, sorry, it was us. We can finally confess 35 years later now that it was George and I that borrowed the Ratel, went to go phone home. We did put in diesel, I believe, and then came back. So anyway, so we do these big exercises. Part of it as well is your first experience with the rat pack that all troopies learn to love or hate. You You learn to love the different whatever you want in these rat packs, and some of them were literally disgusting, but some people liked it, and you learn to trade the things that you wanted there. One of the things that we did as well, which was kind of cool for us because we didn't use it a lot, because I mean, our primary focus was the G5s is on the turret of the gun tractors, which was a Sawmill 100 that was converted into a gun tractor. It had a crane on the back and where you could store the ammo, and on the sides it would have where you put your charges. Then it had like a crew cab where the gun sit in, and then on top of that crew cab, the turret, it had the 50 caliber. So the one night we were allowed to shoot that 50 caliber, and that was impressive because you shoot that tracer round into the hills, and that round would climb up the hill, and it was, you know, just one of those cool things that you used to do. And then we finished this thing with this massive attack and huge artillery bombardments. The tanks, the infantry went in, the enemy was annihilated. And then it was this evening that we were finished, and we were bunched up on a line. And one of the cool things that they say in the artillery world is mark stellen leer, which basically means empty the position. And what that was is you shot everything that you had out, and then so you didn't carry anything back. So we'd shot everything out, we'd lined up, it was dark, and we had some permanent force tiffies with us, the mechanics. And they were at the way in the back, they had their tiffy Ratel with us, and they were at the back. And so in the distance of us, they, I don't know who it was, but they started shooting those 1,000-foot flares off. So it looked pretty cool, you know, your different colors, the parachute ones. So these tiffies behind us, they thought it would be a cool idea, and they started shooting their flares off. Next minute, the whole battery's shooting their flares off. So the commandant comes over the radio, and he starts yelling, and I pick up, and he says, "Where's your number one?" Which was the lieutenant. "Where is he? Where is he? Who's shooting?" I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. There is no shooting of flares going on here. I told him, well, yeah, it was to the east of us. It must be the infantry. It's not us. So he believed us, and we shot off all these flares, and the poor infantry got into trouble. Sorry, guys. So what we were hearing in the background, because of what had happened, is that the operations in Angola were going strong, and we, through the permanent force guys, we were getting a little bit of information of what was going on. And one, unfortunately, what really hit home for us is one of the commandants from the artillery. He was in a Bosbok overflying there during Operation Modular, and that Bosbok was shot down, and he was killed. And so we did a whole funeral procession for him. So we started really realizing that there was something major going on the border, and you know, we were starting to wonder when we would be a part of that, when we would, are we going to be deployed there and stuff like that? You know, would the operation be over? You heard just a minute of what was going on. So then they squared us away, and then they said they gave us a weekend pass, and it was a little bit longer. I believe it was like a 4-day, maybe even a 5-day pass. And then we would get our orders to go to deploy to the border. And I want to tell you something here. My phone is running down. So if we can break for 5 seconds, I just want to get the charger. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all.
Okay.
Maybe Stephen, I've got no electricity and my laptop's running low as well.
I can see
So
that.
yeah. So maybe what we should do is I wanted to chat to you about a few things, and then maybe we should cut it, and then maybe next weekend or sometime
Okay.
in the future carry on from there, if you don't
Yep.
mind. Um, just in
Sure.
terms of
Sure. That sounds good.
and this might be of interest to you, but when Mugabe came into power in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, we deployed to Messina so that if there was any problems, we were there. And they were testing the G5 at Messina when we were there. In fact, we were
Wow.
sighting for them the dummy rounds that they were firing from, I don't know what it was, 30 k's away or something like that. But that was very early stages before it sort of became operational in any way. Then what was
Well,
your sort of,
that's
yeah, so, probably a bit of interest to you. Then what was
yeah,
the sort of,
interesting for sure.
yeah, what was the maximum distance that you would be reasonably accurate with your G5?
They were incredibly accurate. They could shoot within a couple of meters of the target. I'll tell you one of the stories later when we were in Southwest Africa. Yeah, they from those massive ranges, we were getting within 5 to 7 meters of what we wanted to hit, and most of the time, we were right on target. Even in Angola later, when we were deployed, we were using full charge 6 rounds, and we were getting 40, 44 kilometers. And with good weather, I've even heard close to 50 kilometers. You have a base bleed at the end of the round, right? That fills with gas at the back of that would push that round those few extra kilometers. They did it, with, I think also with the 5.5 inch, the G2 round later as well. So you could shoot really, really far with that thing. And as far as I can remember, it was incredibly accurate.
Yeah.
And whatever we wanted to hit, we were hitting.
Yeah. Now, I remember sighting, as I say, it was the very early stages, and they were putting, I think it was like from 30 kilos away, and they were putting dummy rounds just about in a drum. They were that accurate, just within a couple of meters of the drum. And yeah, so
it's
yeah.
bloody
Then
accurate.
tell me the G6 that hadn't come out yet in your time.
No, they were testing it still. We saw it a lot when we were in 10 Art, and it hadn't been. They had pre-production models that actually took part in modular. They had 3 of them. They called them rhinos because of the way they looked. And we actually, when we would deployed up to the border, we saw them. They came past us after finishing at the end of modular, during modular. So that was an amazing machine. We never got to use that. That came much later when they actually started the production models. They only had, I think, 3 pre-production models.
Yeah. Okay. So Stephen, I'm going to say thanks for tonight and or morning still there.
Absolutely.
And then we'll set a date to do a second one. Unfortunately, at the moment we're in
Sounds
stage
good to me,
6.
sir.
Unfortunately, at the moment we're in stage 6 load setting, which means we get 11.5 hours of no electricity a day.
I cannot imagine.
And yeah, so it's a bit difficult there. But thanks very much. It was great chatting to you, and to the legacy viewers out
Yes,
there.
sir.
And legacy viewers out there, thanks for watching. I'm sure you'll have enjoyed this, and we'll have a follow-up fairly shortly. Thanks.
Thank you.